Hello there, everyone. Welcome to Cryptic Corpse. I am your storyteller, and I'm here to guide you tonight. I know many of you use these videos to drift off to sleep, so before we begin, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. I'm always curious, where are you watching from, and what time is it in your part of the world? Now find your cozy spot and relax. My name is Eleanor Webb. I've always loved the ocean, its mysteries, its creatures, its endless rhythm. That's why I became a marine biologist. That's also why I came to this lonely stretch of Oregon coastline in the spring of 1972. I wanted to study the unusual tidal patterns that had been reported here. The research cabin is small, but has everything I need. A bedroom, a kitchen area, and best of all, a workspace full of my equipment. Microscopes, sample containers, charts, and my prized collection of reference books. The cabin sits on a cliff overlooking a series of rocky tide pools. Below, the Pacific Ocean stretches endlessly to the horizon. I still remember my first night here. The sound of waves crashing against the rocks below, the smell of salt in the air, and that feeling of perfect solitude. I'd finally escaped the noise of the university, the constant pressure to publish, the endless faculty meetings. Here, it was just me and the sea. Every morning I wake up before dawn, grab my sample containers, and make my way down the narrow path to the shore. I document everything: water temperature, salinity levels, the behavior of the smallest creatures in the tide pools. I've always been methodical. My Coast Guard training taught me to leave nothing to chance, especially when dealing with the ocean. You're the most prepared researcher I've ever supplied, Harold told me yesterday. Harold Matheson is the local fisherman who brings me groceries and equipment once a week. He's a weathered man with skin like tanned leather and hands permanently curved from decades of pulling fishing nets. You've got to be prepared when you're alone out here, I replied, helping him unload the boxes from his truck. Harold paused then, looking out toward the water. You ever notice anything strange about these tides? That's what I'm studying, I said. They don't follow normal patterns. He nodded slowly. We have bad water years sometimes. Shellfish turn toxic. Fishermen go missing. I laughed it off then. I'm sure there's a scientific explanation. Maybe so, Harold said, but he didn't laugh with me. After he left, I walked along the shoreline making notes in my waterproof journal. That's when I first noticed the stone arrangements. Smooth, black stones placed in perfect circles just above the high tide line. I checked my tide charts. Even during storm surges, the water never reached high enough to disturb these formations. Yet they looked ancient, the stones partly buried in the sand. Who put them here? And why did they remain untouched by the powerful tides? In my cabin that night, I dug through the historical records I'd brought with me. An old journal from a Spanish explorer mentioned a displaced indigenous tribe who worshipped beings they called Deep Ones, creatures that were neither human nor fish, but something in between. The account was dismissive, calling it primitive superstition. I didn't think much of it until I reviewed my tide charts the next morning. The patterns made no sense. The tides here rose and fell at times that contradicted what should be happening. Based on lunar gravitational influence, it was as if some other force was pulling at the water. That night, I tried to radio my department head about my findings. The transmission was filled with static, but beneath it, I heard something else. Rhythmic pulses that reminded me of underwater echolocation. I adjusted the frequency, trying to isolate the sound, but it disappeared as quickly as it had come. Walking the beach the next day, I found shells unlike any I'd seen before. They contained geometric patterns that seemed mathematically perfect. In formation, spirals that followed the golden ratio with absolute precision. I carefully packaged samples to send back to the university for analysis. As darkness fell and the new moon rose, I witnessed something extraordinary. The tide pools began to glow with bioluminescence, but not the kind I'd studied before. This light pulsed in patterns, almost like communication. I sat on the rocks for hours, watching in wonder as the pools of light seemed to respond to each other across the shoreline. It was beautiful. I didn't know then that I was witnessing the first sign of something ancient awakening, something that had been waiting beneath these waters for centuries. I should have left that night. I should have packed my equipment and never looked back. But I was a scientist, and I had just discovered something wonderful, or so I thought. A month passed. Every day I found stranger and stranger things in my tide pools. This morning I picked up a crab that had what looked like clear crystals growing from its shell. They caught the sunlight and threw tiny rainbows across my hands. When I touched the crystals, they felt warm, not cold like they should. Even stranger were the fish I found trapped in a pool after the tide went out. One had 2 spines running down its back instead of 1. I'd never seen anything like it in any textbook. I kept detailed notes of everything, taking pictures with my camera, preserving specimens in jars of alcohol on my workspace shelves. Each night I'd radio the university with my findings, but the static got worse every time. Sometimes I wondered if anyone was hearing me at all. Something else started happening too. The water from my kitchen tap began to taste salty, like the ocean had somehow gotten into the well. I tested it with my equipment. The results said it was normal fresh water, but the taste was there. After drinking it, I'd have dreams where I was deep underwater, sinking down and down, but somehow still breathing. I'd wake up gasping for air, my sheets soaked with sweat. Then I noticed the marks. At first I thought they were just rashes from rubbing against the rough rocks at the tide pools. Small red patches on my hands and feet, but they didn't heal. Instead, they grew larger, developing strange ridges that looked almost like gills. I told myself it was just an unusual infection, maybe a reaction to something in the tide pools. I started wearing gloves when handling specimens, but it didn't help. The marks kept spreading. That's when I called Marcus. Marcus Bishop was a colleague from the university, smarter than me in many ways, and the only person I truly trusted with. Strange findings. He arrived on a Tuesday, his station wagon loaded with additional equipment. "Eleanor, you look..." He paused when he saw me, his smile fading. "Tired?" I offered. "Different," he said. I showed him my research, my specimens, my notes. He was impressed, but troubled. "These mutations shouldn't be possible," he said, examining the 2-spined fish under my microscope. "It's like something is rewriting their DNA." That night, I took Marcus down to the shore to see the tide pools. Something strange happened. He wouldn't get near the water. He kept backing away, making excuses. "I'm just not feeling well from the drive," he said. But I saw the fear in his eyes when he looked at the ocean. The next day, the tide went out further than I'd ever seen it, 100 feet beyond the normal boundary. It revealed things that had been underwater for who knows how long. Stone structures, not just random formations, but what looked like the remains of buildings, ancient walls and pathways covered in barnacles and seaweed. "This isn't natural," Marcus said, taking photos from a distance. He still wouldn't go near the water. I collected samples from pools that had never been exposed to air before. Under the microscope, the water was teeming with organisms I couldn't identify, things that shouldn't exist. Microscopic creatures, with impossible biology, with structures that seemed to shift and change as I watched. "They're adapting," I whispered, right before my eyes. Marcus spent a day at the local historical society while I continued my research. He came back with troubling news. "Every 27 years, he said, spreading old newspapers on my table, "entire coastal settlements in this area have been abandoned. All at once, no explanation." I counted back. The last time would have been 1945, and now it was 1972. That night, something else started happening. I woke up fully dressed, standing in a tide pool, with no memory of how I got there. The water swirled around my ankles, and I swear it was pulling at me. Not like a normal tide, but like something alive. It happened the next night too. And the night after that, Marcus was changing. I noticed it at breakfast. The skin between his fingers looked stretched, almost like webbing. And his eyes, they seemed larger somehow, and slightly out of place on his face. "The water," he said, his voice shaking. "There's something in the water, Eleanor. It's changing us." I looked down at my hands, at the gill-like structures that now wrapped around my wrists. For the first time since arriving, I felt truly afraid. "We need to leave," I said. But even as the words left my mouth, I felt a strange reluctance, a pull, as if something was calling me to stay. That night, the tide went out again, further than ever before. And in the distance, in the wet sand and shallow water, I saw lights moving, not flashlights, something else. Something was coming ashore. The spring equinox arrived with a storm. Rain lashed against my cabin windows, and the wind howled like something in pain. I stood at the window, watching the ocean churn below. The marks on my body had spread, my arms, legs, and now creeping up my neck. I couldn't deny it anymore. Something was happening to me, to us. Marcus hadn't left his room since yesterday. I knocked on his door. "Go away," he said, his voice different, a dirt deeper, with a strange gurgling quality. "We need to talk about what's happening," I said. The door opened slowly. I wasn't prepared for what I saw. Marcus's skin had become almost see-through in places. I could see blue veins and arteries beneath, but they weren't arranged like normal human vessels. They formed new patterns, like they were being redirected. His eyes bulged, larger than before, and had moved slightly to the sides of his head. The webbing between his fingers now reached to the knuckles. "It doesn't hurt," he said, noticing my shock. "That's the strangest part. It feels right." That night they came. I was standing on the shore, not sleepwalking this time, but drawn there by a need I couldn't explain. The tide was out again, revealing the ancient structures. And among them, moving with slow purpose, were shapes. At first I thought they were people, survivors of a boat wreck perhaps. But as they came closer, I saw they weren't human, not entirely. They walked upright, but moved with a swaying gait. Their skin glistened in the moonlight, somewhere between scales and flesh. Where faces should be, they had features that reminded me of people, but wrong. Eyes too large and wide apart, mouths too wide, no visible ears. One approached me. It raised a webbed hand and touched my face. A cool sensation spread from its fingertips, and suddenly I could hear them, not with my ears, but in my mind. Voices like ocean currents flowing around and through me. "We have waited for you." "What? Are you?" I whispered. "We are the first ones, the deep ones. We have always been here." More information flooded into me through that touch. Chemicals secreted from their skin, absorbed through mine. I understood suddenly that they had been watching me since I arrived, that my cabin had been built here deliberately by someone like me who had come before. Someone they had changed. I learned they could manipulate water at its smallest level, molecules, atoms. They had been altering my well water, changing me from the inside out. They had been doing the same to generations of people along this coast, selecting some to change completely, to join them. "Why?" I managed to ask. "We need new blood, new minds." I pulled away and ran back to the cabin. Marcus was gone. His room was empty, except for a pile of clothes on the floor. In a panic, I radioed for help. By some miracle, it worked. The Coast Guard promised to send a rescue team immediately. They arrived just after dawn. 3 men in uniform. I tried to warn them about the water, about what was happening, but they thought I was hysterical from isolation. They gave me water to drink. Their water. Within an hour, all 3 were sick. Within 2, the changes began, much faster than mine had been. They screamed as their skin split and changed, as their eyes bulged and shifted. I watched in horror, unable to help. Marcus returned that evening. He barely looked human anymore. His skin was completely translucent, his internal organs visible and completely rearranged. When he spoke, water dripped from his mouth. "They've been here for millions of years, Eleanor," he said. "They think together. One mind spread across thousands of bodies. And now we'll join them." He told me my transformation was already 60% complete, too far gone to reverse. "The ocean is rising," he said. "They've been working on it for centuries. These coasts will be theirs again soon." With what was left of my human mind, I formed a plan. The geology surveys in my research materials showed fault lines running beneath us. The dynamite I had brought to collect rock samples was still in the storage shed. While Marcus slept, I placed the charges at key points along the cliff face. The entities were gathered below in their ancient structures. I set the timers. Distum. Explosion was bigger than I expected. Half the cliff collapsed, burying the structures and many of the entities beneath tons of rock and soil. But it wasn't enough. They rose from the water all along the shoreline, surrounding me as I tried to reach my car. Water began rising around my feet, defying the tide schedule, moving like it had a mind of its own. I felt my mind slipping away as the transformation reached my brain. New thoughts pushed in, ancient memories that weren't mine. A consciousness, vast and cold and patient. I fought to hold on to myself, to remember my name, my life before this place. But the water kept rising, and with it, my humanity kept sinking. The last thing I remember as Eleanor Webb was standing in water up to my neck, feeling my lungs change, feeling my mind connect to countless others, feeling the loss of everything I had been, while still somehow remembering it. 3 months later, a new marine research station opened 50 miles up the coast. The lead scientist is young and eager, just out of graduate school. She's focused on studying unusual marine life mutations. From the water, I watch her cabin lights at night. I remember being like her once. Soon, she'll notice the unusual tide patterns. She'll find strange shells on the beach. The water in her well will start to taste slightly salty. And we will wait, as we always have, for her to join us. After all, the ocean is patient, and now so am I. My name is Michael Donovan. I used to think I knew the forest. I used to think I understood nature. I was wrong about everything. It all started in 1994. After years of chaining myself to trees and getting arrested at environmental protests, I decided to actually live what I believed. I sold most of what I owned, took my savings, and bought 40 acres of forest land in Michigan's Upper Peninsula. I was going to create the perfect sustainable homestead. The land was beautiful, thick with maple and oak trees, a small stream running through it, and a deep, clear lake nearby. I built my cabin mostly by hand, using timber I carefully selected and harvested myself. I was so proud of how little impact I was making. I planted a garden, set up rainwater collection systems, and even built a small greenhouse for winter vegetables. "You picked a good spot," Vernon Hawke told me when he first came to visit. Vernon was an Ojibwe elder who lived about 5 miles away. He helped me learn which local plants were edible and which trees were best for different uses. "But you should be careful near the lake." "Why's that?" I asked, hammering in the last nail on my new compost bin. Vernon looked uncomfortable. "Our people speak of Mishibiju, the underwater panther, a spirit that lives in the deep waters." I smiled politely. I respected Vernon's knowledge about plants and animals, but I didn't put much stock in spirits and legends. "I'll be careful," I said. As spring turned to summer, I started noticing things, strange things. The fallen trees around my property weren't falling the way trees should. In nature, trees fall randomly, in whatever direction the wind or rot takes them. But these seemed arranged, like someone had carefully placed them in patterns. I started calling them deadfalls in my journal. One day, I was exploring about a mile from my cabin when I came across an old logging camp. The equipment was still there, rusted saws, axes and tools, like everyone had just walked away in the middle of work. It was eerie. I found some old records in a weathered office shack. The camp was from the 1880s, but it looked like it had been abandoned overnight. I became a bit obsessed with mapping my land. I took careful measurements, noted landmarks, and tracked the patterns of wildlife. The deer and rabbits seemed to avoid certain areas completely. Birds wouldn't fly over one particular section of the forest. I told myself it was probably just something natural I didn't understand yet. Maybe something in the soil. My garden was another strange thing. Everything grew too well. I'm not talking about having a green thumb. I'm talking about tomatoes the size of softballs and carrots as thick as my wrist. At first, I was thrilled. By late summer, I had more food than I could possibly eat. "Your land is giving you gifts," Vernon said when he came by one day. He picked up one of my massive zucchinis and frowned. "Too many gifts. Is that bad?" I laughed. "Isn't abundance good?" Vernon didn't laugh back. "There's natural abundance, and then there's payment for something else." I thought he was being superstitious again. But then he told me about the logging camp I'd found. According to Vernon, all 27 men who worked there disappeared in one night in 1883. They had been cutting down the oldest trees in the forest, what Vernon called the grandmother trees. "The forest remembers," he said quietly, "and it doesn't forgive easily." That night, I found a strange rock near my garden. It had carvings on it. Old, weathered carvings that showed what looked like a human figure with branches growing out of its arms and legs. When I showed it to Vernon the next day, his face went pale. "Where did you find this?" he asked. "By the garden," I said. "Is it Ojibwe?" Vernon nodded slowly. "Very old. It's a warning about becoming part of the forest." He handed it back to me carefully, like it might bite. "Michael, maybe you should consider selling this land." I laughed it off. I was finally living my dream, growing my own food, living off the grid, making almost no impact on the environment. Everything was perfect. Too perfect, really? I just didn't know yet what that perfection would cost me. Fall came, and with it, strange changes to my forest home. I started to doubt my own mind. One morning, I went for a walk with my map, the one I'd spent all summer making, but nothing matched up. A big boulder I'd marked was now 30 feet from where it should be. A small pond appeared where I was sure there had only been dry ground before. I must have measured wrong, I told myself, even though I knew I hadn't. My dog Max, a smart black lab who'd been with me for years, acted weird too. He wouldn't go near certain parts of the forest. He'd bark at trees when nothing was there. Then one night, Max disappeared. I called and searched for 3 days straight. I put up signs on the few roads nearby and asked Vernon to spread the word. I was about to give up when Max showed up at my door on the 4th morning, but he wasn't the same dog. His eyes looked different. He flinched when I tried to pet him, and strangest of all, he kept staring at the trees like he could see something moving in them. "Something got into him," Vernon said when he came to check on us. "Something in these woods." I tried to laugh it off. "What, like a ghost?" Vernon didn't smile. "Worse than ghosts. Ghosts were once people. What lives here was never human." I installed trail cameras around my property. I told myself it was to watch for bears or wolves that might have scared Max. But really, I wanted to see what happened in the forest when I wasn't looking. Most of the footage showed nothing unusual. Until the night of the first frost. I still remember sitting at my table, staring at my little camera screen, not believing what I was seeing. Trees moving, not swaying in the wind, actually pulling their roots up and changing position. Just a few inches each, but it was happening. The forest was rearranging itself. I deleted the footage. I decided I'd seen some kind of camera glitch. I had to believe that or I'd go crazy. Then the big storm hit. Winds over 60 miles per hour tore through the Upper Peninsula. I stayed in my cabin, listening to branches snap and trees groan. In the morning, I found a massive oak tree had fallen right at the edge of my garden. Its roots were torn up from the ground, creating a pit nearly 6 feet deep, and tangled in those roots were bones, human bones, old and brown, but unmistakable, a skull, ribs, part of a spine. I called the county sheriff. They sent a deputy who took pictures and called in a forensic team from Marquette. They said the bones were very old, probably from the 1800s. They took them away for testing and asked me to call if I found any more. The hole left by the fallen oak bothered me. I kept finding myself standing at its edge, staring down. There was something about the soil. It was threaded through with what looked like white string, but it wasn't string. It was fungus, thin white mycelia running through the ground in patterns too, even to be natural. I started digging in my garden, curious if the same fungus was there. It was everywhere, a vast underground network. And suddenly my incredible harvests made sense. The plants were being fed by something. It's just mycorrhizal fungus, I told myself. It's normal. It helps plants grow. But normal fungus doesn't form perfect geometric patterns. Normal fungus doesn't pulse slightly when you touch it. I got an email that week saying 3 people wanted to visit my homestead. They were eco-tourists interested in sustainable living who'd heard about my place from an online forum where I'd posted some pictures. I almost told them no. Something felt wrong about bringing strangers here, but I'd been alone too long. I needed normal human contact to chase away the crazy thoughts I was having. Sarah, Tom, and Bryce arrived on a Tuesday. They were all in their 20s, eager and full of questions about composting toilets and solar panels. I gave them a tour, avoiding the fallen oak tree and the strange deadfall patterns. That night we sat around my fire pit, and for a few hours everything felt normal again. We talked about climate change and organic farming. They told stories about their trip across the country in their converted van. I started to relax until Bryce said, "Does anyone else feel like the trees are watching us?" Everyone laughed, but the laughter felt forced. Because we all felt it, that sense of being observed by the dark forest around us. It's just the fire. Playing tricks with the shadows, I said, throwing another log on, but I didn't believe my own words. We all went to bed around midnight. The visitors had tents set up near the cabin. I fell into an uneasy sleep and had dreams of roots growing through my floorboards and wrapping around my ankles. I woke up to screaming. Sarah was standing outside Tom's tent, her face white with terror. Tom was there too, looking confused and scared. Bryce's tent was empty. "He's just gone for a walk," I said, but even as the words left my mouth, I knew they weren't true. We searched all morning, called his name until our voices gave out. I finally hiked to the nearest spot where I could get cell service and called the sheriff again. They organized a search party, but I already knew they wouldn't find him. Not alive anyway. That evening, as the official search was called off until morning, Tom spotted something by the edge of the forest. Bryce's blue jacket, hanging from a tree branch. We ran toward it, but it wasn't hanging from a branch. The branch was growing through it, and the branch was growing from Bryce. He was standing there, or what was left of him, half man, half tree. His lower body was bark and wood fused to the ground. His arms were stretched out, transformed into branches. His eyes were open, aware, terrified, and he was still breathing. "Help me," he whispered, his voice like leaves rustling. "It's inside me, growing." I backed away, pulling Sarah and Tom with me. We ran to the cabin and locked ourselves in. None of us slept that night. We took turns watching the windows, though. I don't know what we thought we'd see. In the morning, Bryce was gone. Just another tree in the forest. I started finding gaps in my journal. Entire days I couldn't remember. I'd find entries in my own handwriting describing things I had no memory of doing, planted new seedlings in the North Field. The soil accepted them hungrily, fed the roots with my blood to make them grow faster, found more bones by the stream, reburied them deeper. The ground was warm and pulsing. It appreciated my offering. I showed these entries to Tom and Sarah. "We need to leave," Sarah said, her voice shaking. "Now, today." I agreed, but I had the terrible feeling it was already too late. We tried to leave that morning. We really did. We packed our bags and started walking down the dirt road that led to the highway. But after 3 hours of walking, we found ourselves back at my cabin. "This isn't possible," Tom said, looking at his GPS. "We've been walking south the whole time." We tried again. This time we used a compass and marked trees as we passed them. Same result. No matter which direction we went, we somehow circled back. That night, Sarah started coughing. When she covered her mouth, green specks came away on her hand, not mucus. "Something like tiny leaves. What's happening to me?" she whispered, showing me her palm. Before I could answer, there was a knock at the door. Vernon stood outside, his old face lined with worry. "I felt it," he said simply. "It's awake now, fully awake." He came inside and looked at Sarah's hand, then at the green spots now appearing on her neck. "The greening," he said sadly. "It's starting." "What's starting?" Tom demanded, his voice rising. "What is happening here?" Vernon sat down heavily at my kitchen table. "The forest is very old, older than people, and it's not just trees. It's one thing, one mind spread out through roots and fungus. Underneath, it sleeps most of the time, but sometimes it wakes up." "You're talking about a plant like it's alive," Tom said. "Everything's alive," Vernon replied, "but this is alive like you and me. It thinks, it remembers, and it doesn't see time the way we do. To this forest, the logging camp from 1883 might as well be yesterday. I told Vernon about Bryce, about the deadfalls moving, about my journal. He nodded like he'd expected all of it. "The forest has been tasting you, Michael, through your food. The fungus in the soil connects to the plants. When you eat the plants, it learns about you." Sarah started coughing harder. When she pulled her hand away this time, there were small twigs mixed with blood. "Can we help her?" I asked Vernon. "No," he said simply. "She's becoming part of it now. The process takes weeks, sometimes months." Tom backed away from Sarah. "This isn't real, this can't be real," but it was. And deep down, I think I'd known it was real from the first time I saw those strange deadfall patterns. That night, Sarah's skin started to harden into something like bark. Small leaves budded from her fingertips. She was in pain, terrible pain. "Kill me," she begged. "Please, I can feel it moving inside, taking over." I couldn't do it, but in the morning Tom was gone. So was my hunting rifle. I heard the shot from deep in the forest. I never found either of them. Vernon stayed with me. He explained more about the forest entity. His people had known about it for centuries. They'd made a deal long ago. They would offer sacrifices, and in return, the forest would protect them, provide food in hard winters. But the white loggers didn't know, he said. They cut down the grandmother trees, the oldest trees. That's where most of its mind lives. It defended itself. "Why did it let me build here?" I asked. "Why did it let me stay so long?" "It was studying. You," Vernon said. "Your sustainable ways interested it. Most humans take. You were trying to give back. It wanted to understand." I looked down at my hands then. Really looked. The veins under my skin had a greenish tint, and there was a small, hard patch on my wrist that looked like birch bark. "I'm changing too," I whispered. Vernon nodded. "We all are. Just slower. I've lived near it my whole life. Made my peace with it." He showed me his arm. The skin was striated like wood grain. "You have a choice," he said. "Fight it and suffer, or join willingly and keep your mind." "Join what? Become a tree. Become part of the forest mind. Your thoughts will spread through the roots. You'll feel everything the forest feels. You'll never die, not really. I thought about Bryce's terrified eyes, about Sarah's pain. That's not living. It's not human living, Vernon agreed, but it's something else, something older. The next day, Vernon walked into the forest alone. He went to the oldest tree on my property, a massive oak that had to be hundreds of years old. I watched from a distance as he placed his hands on the trunk, said words I couldn't hear, and then sank into it. Not like magic. Like the tree opened itself and took him in. I was alone then. The patches of bark on my skin were spreading. I could feel things I shouldn't be able to feel. Water moving underground, insects crawling over roots 100 feet away. In my dreams, I wasn't myself anymore. I was spread out, conscious but divided. I could feel every tree, every plant. I could feel animals walking above my roots. I could remember centuries. I decided to fight. I found the old logging equipment from the abandoned camp, used an axe to attack the big oak tree where Vernon had disappeared. The forest responded immediately. The ground shook. Trees bent toward me like they were made of rubber. Roots burst from the soil, grabbing at my legs. The more I fought, the faster the transformation happened. The bark spread over my chest, down my legs. It hurt worse than anything I'd ever felt. As a last, desperate act, I went to my shed and grabbed my emergency propane tanks. I knew fire was the forest's weakness. Vernon had mentioned it once. I rolled the tanks to the base of the old oak, rigged up a simple trigger, and ran as far as I could before setting it off. The explosion tore a hole in the forest. Trees burned. For a brief moment, I felt a path open, a way out through the burning section. The forest's attention was focused on the flames, not on me. I ran toward the gap, toward freedom. But I was too changed already. My legs were stiff. My movement slowed by the bark covering most of my body. I made it to the edge of the burning area before roots erupted from the ground and pulled me down. I didn't fight anymore. There was no point. As the roots pulled me into the earth, I felt my mind expanding, connecting to the vast network beneath. I felt Vernon's consciousness there, and others, the loggers from 1883, other unfortunate wanderers through the centuries, and, at the center of it all, the ancient mind of the forest itself. Vast, patient, hungry. That was 3 months ago, I think. Time is different now. My body is gone, transformed completely into part of the root system. But my mind remains, spread throughout the forest. I feel everything now. The deer walking above, the rain soaking through to the roots, the slow, patient growth of every tree. I felt the new person arrive yesterday. Another idealist, like I was. She has plans for a sustainable tiny house, solar panels, a garden. I try to warn her through the wind in the leaves, try to make the deadfalls obvious enough that she'll understand. But she doesn't see the patterns, yet doesn't understand what the forest wants from her. She's planting her garden now, in the rich soil above where what's left of me feeds the roots. And the forest is so very, very hungry. My name is Jack Winters. I used to think I knew what cold meant back when I worked for North Star Oil. 7 years on the survey teams will teach you plenty about Alaska's wilderness. But real cold, the kind that gets into your bones and changes. You? I didn't know a thing about that until 1979. I built my cabin near Wrangell St. Elias after everything fell apart. They don't like it when you report unsafe drilling practices to the government. I had 2 choices after blowing the whistle: disappear or have an accident on one of the remote platforms. So I cashed out my savings and vanished into the last true wilderness. This place seemed perfect, far enough from anywhere that the company men wouldn't bother looking, but with enough natural resources that a guy with my training could make it work. I spent that first summer building the cabin, setting up my ham radio, mapping the area. Even found some amazing ice caves about 2 miles east. Nature's freezer, I called them. perfect for storing extra meat after a good hunt. I wasn't completely alone at first. Walter Quinn, an Athabascan local, helped me get established. Taught me things about this region you won't find in any survey manual. Walter was old school, the kind of man who could read the weather from how ptarmigans flocked or tell you when. A storm was coming 3 days out just by smelling the air. "This is good land," he told me while helping set the corner posts for my cabin, "but not always safe land." I laughed it off. "Bears and wolves I can handle." Walter didn't smile back. "Not talking about bears, Jack. Talking about the long winter. People, the ones who hunt in darkness." I chalked it up to local superstition. "The tribes up here have stories for everything. Ways to explain the harshness of the environment, to give fear a shape you can understand." I respected Walter, but I had science and experience on my side. Or so I thought. The ice caves were my first hint that something was off. I was mapping them, thinking they might make good emergency shelter. Deep in the back of the main chamber, where the ceiling lifted into a kind of dome, I found the carvings, petroglyphs etched into the ice wall. Not the stone, the actual ice. They showed stick-like human figures, but wrong somehow. Too tall, too thin, with limbs that bent at impossible angles. And they were shown gathering around normal human figures, bending over them like they were feeding. I took photos, but didn't show them to Walter. I don't know why. By late August, my setup was solid. Cabin insulated and sealed. Meat smoking shed completed. Root cellar dug and stocked. Enough firewood. Chopped and stacked to last 2 winters. 3 backup systems for everything essential. I had my rifles oiled and ready. Traps set in strategic locations. And enough preserved food to last months if hunting got tough. That's when the animals started behaving strangely. I've spent enough time in the backcountry to know normal wildlife. Patterns. But that September, everything changed. I started finding tracks of wolverines, lynx, even a grizzly, all heading north in a hurry. Not normal migration routes, just leaving. My journal entries from those weeks are full of questions about it. Then the radio started picking up things it shouldn't have. I'd be checking weather reports, scanning frequencies for any chatter. When between the static bursts I'd catch snippets, whispers, words I couldn't quite make out, but definitely human voices. Except there's nothing out here, no stations, no settlements for 100 miles that could broadcast with such weak signals. I established a routine. Up before dawn, check traps, maintain equipment, split more wood, hunt if needed, record temperatures and weather patterns, check the radio. I kept busy, kept focused. The discipline made me feel safe, in control. The first ice formation appeared in early October. I woke up to find a perfect spiral of ice crystals about 3 feet high, standing in the clearing 30 yards from my front door. It looked like glass catching the morning light in ways that normal ice doesn't. Perfectly symmetrical, not something nature makes on its own. I took photos, circled it carefully. No tracks in the light dusting of snow around it. The temperature had only gotten down to 28 degrees overnight. Not cold enough to form something that complex. I convinced myself it was some weird natural phenomenon I just hadn't encountered before. The storm hit 3 days later. Not a normal Alaskan northerner, but something monstrous. Winds that nearly ripped the roof off my cabin. Temperatures dropping so fast the thermometer seemed to be failing. Whiteout conditions for days. The radio went completely dead, not even static. When it finally cleared enough to step outside, everything was transformed. Snow piled 15 feet high in some places, just inches in others. Like the storm had somehow been selective about where it dumped its load. The strangest part was the silence. Alaska is never truly silent. There's always some bird call, the rustle of small animals, wind in the trees. But this was absolute, like the wilderness was holding its breath. That's when I found it. A half-eaten moose carcass, somehow suspended between 3 tall spruce trees, at least 20 feet off the ground. The blood was still fresh, dripping down to make tiny red holes in the pristine snow. But there were no tracks anywhere, not from wolves, Not from bears, not from anything. Just a mutilated moose hanging in the trees like some kind of warning. Told myself it was a mountain lion that dragged its kill up there. But mountain lions don't range this far north, and they can't lift a 1,000-pound moose. That night, as the temperature plunged lower than I'd ever recorded, I could have sworn I heard something moving around the cabin. Not four-legged, two-legged, but with a strange sliding gait that didn't sound human. And every now and then, between the wind gusts, what sounded like whispering, the same kind I'd heard on the radio. I stoked the fire higher and kept my rifle across my lap until dawn, telling myself I was ready for whatever was out there. I had no idea how wrong I was. I couldn't sleep well after finding that moose. Something wasn't right. I set up my hunting camera near the edge of the clearing, hoping to catch whatever was moving around at night. Just to prove to myself it was just a wolf or maybe a bear I hadn't tracked yet. 3 days later, I checked the camera. Most of the photos showed nothing but empty woods and shadows, but there was one, taken at 3:17 a.m., that made my skin crawl. Between two tall pines stood something. The flash hadn't lit it up well, but I could make out a shape. Tall, way too tall to be human, skinny, with arms that hung down almost to the ground. Its skin looked pale gray in the dim light, stretched tight over what seemed like too many joints. I told myself it was just a weird shadow or a smudge on the lens. But deep down, I knew better. The weather kept getting worse. I've lived through Alaskan winters before, but this was different. The thermometer dropped to 50-degree low, then 60-degree low. Then one morning, I found it broken, the mercury frozen solid at 70-degree low. That's not supposed to be possible at this altitude. My firewood started disappearing, faster than it should. I'm methodical about these things. I know exactly how much wood I burn each day. I had calculated precisely how much I'd need for the winter, with extra just in case. But my carefully stacked piles were shrinking too quickly. Each morning, there seemed to be less than there should be, like someone was helping themselves during the night. Then there were my dogs. I kept 5 huskies, good, strong sled dogs who weren't afraid of anything, animals I trusted with my life. One morning, I went to feed them and found them all huddled in the corner of their shelter, shaking. They wouldn't come when I called, wouldn't eat, just stared past me with eyes wide with fear. When I tried to touch Thunder, my lead dog, he just whimpered and pressed himself harder against the wall. Inside the cabin, things got stranger. I'd wake up to find my chair moved from one side of the room to the other. My hunting knife, which I always left on the table by the door, would be on my pillow. Cans of food stacked in impossible towers. At first, I thought maybe I was doing these things myself and forgetting. Maybe the isolation was getting to me, or carbon monoxide from the stove was messing with my head. I checked the stove. It was fine. My radio journals became my lifeline to sanity. Every night I'd record the day's events, the temperature, my food supply levels. It gave me structure. But one evening, I was playing back the previous day's recording and heard something that turned my blood to ice. "They're coming through the walls now," said my voice on the tape. "They don't need doors. Cold like them doesn't need invitations." I had no memory of saying those words, no memory of recording that section at all. That's when the students showed up. 3 of them, 2 guys and a girl, stumbled out of the storm one evening, half frozen and desperate. Said they were graduate students from the University of Alaska, doing research on local folklore. Their snowmobile had broken down 5 miles back. "We're documenting stories about the Quileute," said Megan, the girl, as she warmed her hands by my stove. "Native spirit creatures said to live in this region." "You picked a bad time for a field trip," I told them. I warned them about the strange things I'd seen, the unnatural cold. Told them which areas to avoid, especially the ice caves. They nodded and thanked me, but I could tell they weren't taking me seriously. They probably thought I was just some crazy hermit, half out of my mind, from isolation. The next morning they wanted to explore. I begged them not to go toward the caves, but they insisted. "It's why we came all this way," said Trevor, the taller of the two guys. "The caves are mentioned in all the old stories. They left after breakfast. Only one came back." It was nearly midnight when I heard the screaming. I grabbed my rifle and headlamp and ran outside to find Brian, the shorter student, stumbling through the snow. His face was scratched and bleeding, his eyes wild with panic. "They took them!" he screamed when he saw me. "They just took them! Megan and Trevor! Oh, God!" I got him inside and tried to calm him down. His skin was ice cold to the touch, even though he'd only been outside for maybe 20 minutes. And some of the scratches on his face seemed to be forming frost patterns, spreading slowly across his skin. "What did you see?" I asked, after getting some hot tea into him. What he told me didn't make sense. They'd found the main ice cave and gone inside with their research equipment. Everything was fine until they reached the back chamber, the one with the petroglyphs. Brian said the ice started to move, to ripple like water. Then tall shapes just stepped out of the walls, grabbed Megan first. Trevor tried to help her, and was taken too. Brian only escaped because he was nearest to the entrance. "They weren't solid," he kept saying. "I could see through them, like they were made of glass or ice." He was shaking uncontrollably now. "They're the Keyleth, just like in the stories. They hunt human warmth." I didn't want to believe him. But then I found the footprints inside my cabin the next morning. I always keep the door locked and barred at night. The windows too. No way anything could get in. But there they were, wet footprints on the wooden floor. Huge, at least 16 inches long, narrow, with toes that pointed backward instead of forward. They went from the back wall to my bed, then to the chair where Brian had slept, then back to the wall. Like something had walked right through the solid log walls, checked on us both, and left the same way. When I showed them to Brian, he broke down, told me everything they'd learned about the Keyleth legends, how the native tribes believed they were ancient beings that fed on human body heat, how they could pass through solid matter as long as it was cold enough, how they kept their victims alive and aware during feeding, sometimes for weeks or months. "We thought it was just stories," he whispered. "Just stupid myths." That night, as the temperature outside dropped to impossible lows and the darkness seemed to press against the windows like something alive, I faced the truth. The myths were real, and they knew we were here. I had to find out what happened to Megan and Trevor. Maybe they were still alive. I couldn't just hide in my cabin and wait. So the next morning, I loaded my pack with emergency supplies, my shotgun, extra shells, flares, and a thermos of hot coffee. I told Brian to bar the door behind me and not to open it for anyone but me. "How will I know it's really you?" he asked, his eyes darting to the strange footprints still visible on the floor. "Good question." I wrote a phrase on a piece of paper, folded it and put it in his pocket, asked me to repeat this. "If I can't, it's not me." The trek to the ice caves was brutal. The temperature had to be well below 70 degrees Celsius now, cold enough that the inside of my nose froze with each breath. The snow made weird crunching sounds underfoot, like it was made of tiny glass shards instead of frozen water. Nothing moved in the forest. No birds, no animals, nothing. Just dead silence and that crushing cold. I found the entrance to the main cave right where I remembered. It was bigger somehow, the opening wider than before, with strange ice formations around it like teeth. I switched on my headlamp and went inside. The cave was different. The walls seemed smoother, more polished, and they had a faint blue glow that hadn't been there before, not bright enough to see by, but definitely noticeable. My breath made clouds in front of my face that froze and fell to the ground like tiny snowflakes. I called out for the students, my voice echoing weirdly off the ice. No answer. I pushed deeper into the cave system, following the blue glow that got stronger as I went. When I reached the chamber with the petroglyphs, I stopped cold. The carvings were moving, slowly shifting and changing on the walls like they were alive somehow. And they weren't alone anymore. The chamber was filled with perfectly preserved human remains, some looking centuries old, others fresher, all partially eaten in the same strange way. No blood, no torn flesh, just bodies that looked like they'd been slowly hollowed out from the inside, leaving the skin mostly intact but sunken in, like deflated balloons. And there, against the far wall, were Megan and Trevor, still dressed in their winter gear, eyes open and aware, looking right at me. But their skin had a blue tint, and parts of their faces and hands looked almost transparent, like they were turning into ice from the inside out. Their mouths moved, trying to form words, but no sound came out. I rushed toward them, but stopped, when the air between us rippled like heat waves over summer pavement. Except this was cold, so intensely cold, it burned my exposed skin instantly. They stepped out of the walls then. The Keyleth, just like Brian had described, tall, impossibly thin figures, at least 9 feet high, with limbs that bent at odd angles. Their bodies were semi-transparent, like living ice sculptures, and they moved with a fluid grace that didn't seem possible for something so large. Everywhere they touched left frost patterns spreading across the cave floor. I raised my shotgun, but before I could fire, a voice filled my head, not heard through my ears, directly inside my mind. "Warm one," it said, the words somehow forming, inside my thoughts with a voice like cracking ice. "We have been tasting your heat while you sleep, such sweet warmth." My gun suddenly weighed 1,000 pounds. I couldn't lift it, couldn't run, could barely think straight. More voices joined the first, a chorus of cold whispers directly in my brain. "We have waited, imprisoned in cold and darkness. Your kind keeps us here." They showed me things then, pushing images directly into my mind. I saw them as they once were, ancient beings that fed on thermal energy, trapped in the deepest ice ages, dormant until human heat awakened them. I saw native tribes performing rituals at the cave entrances, sacrifices to keep the entities contained. I saw Walter, my friend Walter, leaving offerings of fresh meat at the cave entrance. He had known. He had been trying to protect me by feeding them, keeping them satisfied so they wouldn't roam. But they were growing stronger now. The climate was changing, the permafrost weakening. And North Star Oil, my old company, was planning a pipeline that would run right through these mountains, bringing heat and disruption that would free them completely. One of the creatures glided closer. I felt the air around me drop another 20 degrees. My eyelashes froze together. "Your kind carries such beautiful warmth," it whispered in my mind. "We need it. We will take it all." A sudden commotion from the cave entrance broke their focus. Brian stumbled in, wild-eyed and ranting. But something was wrong with him. His movements were jerky, unnatural. When he spoke, his voice had that same quality of cracking ice I'd heard in my head. "They can travel in us," he said, but it wasn't really him speaking. His skin was starting to look translucent in patches. "We are their vessels to warmer places." That's when I understood their full plan. They needed human hosts to leave this frozen place, to spread to cities and towns where they could feed on thousands, millions of warm bodies, and the oil pipeline would give them the perfect pathway to civilization. My limbs felt heavy, numb. Looking down, I saw frost creeping up my legs, tiny crystals forming on my skin. I could still feel everything, but couldn't move properly. One of the creatures was right in front of me now, its face, if you could call it that, just inches from mine. I felt something cold sliding into my veins, replacing my blood with some kind of sub-zero fluid that burned like fire while freezing me from within. "You will join us," the voices said together. "Your heat will feed us for days, and then your body will carry us south." With horror, I realized parts of my fingers had turned completely to ice and were starting to crack, yet I could still feel them, excruciating pain as they crystallized and shattered. But worse than the physical agony was the sensation of my thoughts being invaded, pieces of my consciousness being absorbed into their group mind. I glimpsed fragments of other victims' memories, trappers from the 1800s, indigenous hunters from centuries earlier, all still somehow alive inside the collective awareness of these creatures, all still experiencing that slow, agonizing consumption of their warmth and selfhood. I wouldn't end up like that. Couldn't. With the last of my strength, I fumbled in my pack. My hands were barely working, fingers breaking off like icicles as I moved. But I managed to grab what I needed, the emergency flare gun. Not to signal for help. There was no help coming. But because I'd loaded my pack with something else, the dynamite I used for clearing fallen trees. Fire, I gasped, the word freezing in the air. You fear fire. The creatures recoiled slightly, confirming my guess. Heat and flame, the opposite of their cold existence, could hurt them, at least temporarily. I fired the flare directly at my own pack. The creatures screeched in my mind as it ignited, the dynamite inside catching almost immediately. The explosion was deafening in the enclosed space, flames erupting everywhere. The cave ceiling began to crack. Perfect. Better than I'd hoped. As the flames temporarily drove the creatures back, I had a moment of clarity. I could feel parts of myself already absorbed into their hive mind, could sense their panic, their rage, could feel what they felt. They weren't truly immortal, just ancient, patient, and very, very hard to kill. The cave was collapsing now, massive chunks of ice falling from above. The students' bodies were crushed instantly. I didn't have long. I staggered toward the entrance, trailing broken pieces of myself with each step. Behind me, the creatures were already regrouping. The flames dying out as they pulled the heat away, consumed it like food. Outside, the mountainside was groaning. The explosion had destabilized the snowpack. I'd spent enough time in these mountains to recognize the sound of an avalanche beginning. I didn't try to outrun it. I knew I was already partly transformed, already partly one of them. Instead, I faced the oncoming wall of snow and ice with the strangest feeling of clarity. The avalanche hit with the force of a freight train, burying everything, the cave, the creatures, and me. Thousands of tons of snow and ice, entombing us all beneath the frozen earth. That was 3 weeks ago, I think. Time is hard to track here in the darkness. I'm still conscious, still aware, though I no longer have a body in any normal sense. The creatures are here with me, dormant but not dead. I can feel them dreaming their cold dreams around me. Parts of my mind are still being slowly absorbed into theirs. I can also feel the coming spring, the faint warmth beginning to penetrate even this deep. When the thaw comes, they'll awaken again, and the pieces of me that are now part of them will awaken too. North Star Oil hasn't given up their plans. Through the creature's strange awareness, I can somehow sense the vibrations of machines on the surface. Survey teams, drilling equipment, my old company coming to free these things without even knowing it. I'm writing this in my mind now, with the last truly human parts of my consciousness. If anyone finds this, if anyone can somehow hear these thoughts, burn it all. Burn the whole mountain down to bedrock. It's the only way to be sure, because the long winter people are patient. They've waited millennia before. They'll wait again, and when they rise, they'll be carrying parts of me with them. My name was Jack Winters, and I am becoming something else entirely. My name is Philip Gaines. I've been out here in the Nevada desert for almost 6 months now, just me and my radio equipment. It's 1956 and the world is changing fast, but out here, time seems to stand still. Well, most of the time, I used to work in communications for the military. Radios, signals, codes, that was my whole life for years. I was good at it too. When strange things started happening during some tests out in the desert, My commanders just brushed it off. Static, they said. Equipment failure, but I knew better. There were patterns in that noise, something trying to speak. So when I got out, I took my savings and set up this listening post. It's nothing fancy, a small cabin, a generator, and enough radio equipment to make most universities jealous. Out. Here there's no one to tell me I'm crazy. No one to shut down my research when it gets uncomfortable. The locals think I'm just another government man gone strange in the head. Only Raymond Winnemucca, my Paiute guide, seems to understand. He helped me find this spot, helped me build the cabin. Good man Raymond. Quiet, but he knows this land better than anyone. This place has spirits, he told me once, as we were setting up my main antenna. Voice stealers live in the canyon. They take your words right from your mouth and never give them back. I laughed then. I'm not laughing anymore. It was during my third week here that I found the dead zone. I was mapping signal strength across my property when I discovered it. A perfect circle, about 50 yards across, where no radio signals could penetrate. Not shortwave, not AM, not even military. Frequencies I shouldn't technically be able to access. Nothing. Complete silence. The weird thing was, there was no reason for it. No geological formations that would block signals, no unusual magnetic readings. Just a perfect circle of radio silence. I started keeping detailed logs after that. Every transmission, every bit of static, every strange blip on my equipment. Most nights I'd sit with my headphones on until sunrise, listening to the emptiness between stations. Sometimes I'd catch fragments, patterns that almost sounded like language, but matched no code I'd ever studied. And I studied them all. Then I found the markers. Government survey stakes driven into the ground around my property, some dating back to the 1940s. They had radiation symbols on them, faded but unmistakable. When I dug up one of the metal tags to examine it, half the information was blacked. Out project something or other. The name was scratched away. I wasn't worried, not then. I had survival training, enough canned food to last a year, and my radio equipment gave me a sense of connection to the outside world. I knew what I was doing. I was in control. That's what I thought anyway. The first time I heard the voices, I was half asleep at my desk. It was just after midnight, and I'd been drifting off when my headphones suddenly came alive with the sound of people talking. Perfect, clear English. Like a normal radio broadcast except for one thing. They were talking about me. Subject continues monitoring, unaware of transmission penetration. I jerked awake, frantically checking my equipment. The voice was coming through on a frequency that had been dead silent for weeks. I grabbed my logbook and started writing, trying to record every word. Cognitive restructuring at 17%, neural pathways showing adaptation to frequency modulation, and then silence. Just like that, they were gone. I spent the rest of the night trying to find them again, scanning every frequency, but there was nothing. The next morning, I hiked out to the canyon Raymond had warned me about. I was looking for something, anything that might explain what I'd heard. What I found instead were petroglyphs carved into the red rock walls, ancient drawings showing humanoid figures with lines radiating from their heads like antennas. The Paiute hadn't made these. Raymond confirmed that later. Nobody knew who had. When I got back to my cabin, my backup radio was on. I always keep it off to save power. But there it was, dials glowing, making a soft humming sound. And when I looked closer, I saw that the metal casing had strange burn marks on it, perfect geometric patterns seared into the steel like some kind of circuit diagram. I shut it off and unplugged it. Then I checked my main equipment. Everything seemed normal, except for one thing. My signal recorder had been running all day, and it had picked up something while I was gone. Static mostly, but underneath it, barely audible. Philip Gaines. We see you now. I told myself it was a prank. Some ham radio operator who'd picked up my signals and decided to have some fun with the crazy guy in the desert. Or maybe the military. checking up on an ex-employee who'd set up shop too close to their testing grounds. But deep down, I knew better. Because when I played the tape back a second time, the voice was gone, replaced by a high-pitched tone that made my fillings ache. I should have left then, packed up and gone back to civilization, but I couldn't. Not when I was finally getting proof of what I'd suspected all along. There was something out there, something that communicated through the frequencies most people never bothered to check, something that had noticed me noticing it, and so stayed, telling myself I was still in control, still the trained professional conducting an investigation. I had my equipment, my expertise, my military training. What could possibly harm me out here in the emptiness? I was about to find out just how wrong I was. The headache started 3 weeks after I heard the voices. At first, just a dull pain behind my eyes when I worked with certain radio frequencies. Nothing serious, I thought. Just eye strain from staring at dials and meters all day. But they got worse. Much worse. It always happened at the same time, whenever I tuned to that empty band around 87.5 MHz. Within seconds, pain would explode through my skull, like someone had driven a hot nail into my brain. I'd have to shut off the equipment and lie down in the dark for hours afterward. Still, I kept going back to that frequency. I had to know what was there. One night, as I lay in bed with another splitting headache, I noticed something odd. A sort of tickling sensation in my jaw, followed by whispers. Actual whispers, like someone was talking right next to my ear. But I was alone, completely alone. It took me 2 more days to figure it out. It was my fillings, the metal ones in my back teeth. They were picking up transmissions somehow, like tiny receivers planted inside my head. And they only worked when I was near that dead zone I'd found. Initial contact established through dental amalgam, subject experiencing direct neural input. I heard those words clear as day, while standing at the edge of that circle where no signals could get through. No radio was on. The words came from inside my own head. I ran back to my cabin and didn't come out for 2 days. When I finally did, I found something that made no sense at all. My backup radio, the one I'd unplugged after finding it mysteriously turned on, was working again. The power cord was still lying on the floor, disconnected, but the dials were lit up, and it was scanning through frequencies on its own. I checked the batteries. There weren't any. The radio was running on nothing, but only at certain times, exactly 3:17 a.m. and 3:17 p.m. For exactly 6 minutes each time, it would spring to life, scan through frequencies, then go dead again. I needed answers. I dug through my old military contacts and called in favors until someone sent me what I was looking for. Classified documents about something called Project Whisperer. Most pages were blacked out, but I learned enough. The government had been trying to communicate with something out here, something they described as a non-human intelligence. The documents were from 1947, right after the first atomic tests. Meanwhile, my recordings were getting stranger. I'd play back a tape of nothing but static, and the next day that same tape would contain voices. Clear voices discussing things I'd done that day. Things no one could have seen unless they were watching me. But it got worse. The 3rd or 4th. A time I'd play the same tape. The content would change again. The voices would be discussing things that hadn't happened yet. Raymond stopped coming by. The last time I saw him, he'd found me sitting at my table, talking. But I wasn't speaking English or any language I know. Raymond said I was speaking perfect Paiute. Not just modern Paiute, but an ancient dialect that hadn't been spoken in generations. A dialect I couldn't possibly know. He backed away from me, making some kind of sign with his hands. A protection symbol, I think. He hasn't been back since. I was alone when the government men arrived, 2 of them in plain suits driving a plain car with government plates. They said they were checking radiation levels in the area, but they spent more time looking at my equipment than using their Geiger counters. "Have you experienced any unusual phenomena, Mr. Gaines?" the taller one asked. His name was Clark. "Unexplained transmissions, Equipment malfunctions? I lied. I don't know why, but something told me not to trust them. Nothing unusual, I said. Just a lot of empty air. Clark didn't believe me. I could tell by the way he looked at my logbooks, how his eyes lingered on my equipment. The other man, Davis, barely spoke. He just kept staring at the canyon beyond my property. "What's out?" "There," I finally asked him. "In that canyon?" "Nothing," he said too quickly. "Just old stories, native superstitions. They asked to stay the night, said their car needed a repair. I couldn't refuse without seeming suspicious, so I let them roll out sleeping bags in my front room. That night, I had the dreams again. Numbers and equations flowing through my mind like water. Mathematical formulas so complex I could never understand them while awake. But in the dreams, they made perfect sense. I saw how they all connected, how they described something vast and strange and alive somehow. I woke up to shouting. Davis was gone. Clark was at the door, yelling his name into the darkness. It was just before dawn. He went outside to smoke around midnight. Clark told me, his voice tight with worry. Never came back. We found him at noon, wandering in the dead zone. He was walking in perfect circles, his eyes wide open, but seeing nothing. When Clark tried to use his radio to call for help, it was dead. So was his watch. So was every piece of electronic equipment Davis had been carrying. Later, when Davis could speak again, all he said was, "They showed me. They showed me what they are." He wouldn't say anything else. Clark decided they needed to leave immediately. As they drove away, I saw Davis press his hand against the car window, looking back at me. His lips moved, forming words I couldn't hear. That night, I was reviewing some old recordings when I found something that made my blood freeze. It was my voice, unmistakably mine, on a tape recorded when I'd been hiking 10 miles away from my equipment. My voice, speaking words in a language I'd never heard before, speaking them perfectly without hesitation. Something was using my voice, and from the dates on the tapes, it had been doing it for weeks. I'm writing this down because I'm not sure how much longer I'll remember it. Something is happening to me. Something is changing the way my mind works. Last night, I caught myself standing in front of my radio equipment, rewiring it in ways that make no sense to me now. Complex modifications I don't remember learning, and the worst part, the equipment works better now. It picks up signals from places no signal should come from, places that might not even be on Earth. I saw them for the first time yesterday. I don't know if saw is the right word. You can't really see them, not with your eyes, but I know they're there. They live in the electricity, in the signals, in the waves that pass through the air all around us, invisible but everywhere. They're made of pure energy, these things. They only become visible when they disturb electrical equipment, making lights flicker or dials spin, like shadows cast by something moving behind a curtain. I was checking my antennas when all the hair on my arm stood up. The air felt charged, like right before lightning strikes. My flashlight began to pulse, growing brighter then dimmer, though I hadn't touched the switch. In that pulsing light, I saw them, shapes in the air, thin as paper but somehow deep as canyons. They moved around me, through me. They didn't speak, not with sounds, but I understood them anyway. They've been here all along. Maybe not on Earth exactly, but alongside it, living in a place that touches ours only through the electromagnetic spectrum, radio waves, electricity, the tiny electrical pulses in our brains. Clark came back today, alone. Davis is receiving treatment, he said, but there was something different about Clark now. His eyes were too focused, his movements too perfect, like someone doing a very good impression of being human. We've been studying them since 1945, he told me, his voice flat. The first atomic tests created a tear between their world and ours. We've been trying to communicate ever since. Project Whisperer, I said. He nodded. We established contact with 13 subjects, all military personnel with communications. Training, like you. What happened to them? I asked, though I was afraid I already knew. Neural rewriting. Their brains were reconfigured. They began to think differently, speak differently. They became messengers. Messengers for what? For them, the entities, that's what we call them. Beings of pure electromagnetic energy. I asked the question that had been haunting me for weeks. What do they want? Clark smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. To share, to merge, to expand. That's when I understood the dead zone. It wasn't a place where signals couldn't penetrate. It was a place where they consumed all electromagnetic energy. Like a mouth, always feeding. Clark explained how they'd been gradually altering my brain, changing its electrical patterns to match their communication frequency. My headaches, my strange dreams, the mathematical formulas, all part of the conversion. You're lucky, he said. Most subjects go insane during the process. Your military training, your background in codes and signals, you were the perfect candidate. That's why we let you set up here. Let me. They'd known all along. 3 days later, Davis returned. But it wasn't Davis anymore, not really. He moved, like a puppet, his face blank except when speaking. Then he would become animated, passionate even, but it was all wrong somehow, like watching an actor who had studied humans but never actually been one. We exist in a dimension that intersects with yours, Davis explained, his voice now strangely melodic. For millennia we could only touch your world in tiny ways, inspiring certain people, planting ideas. The atomic tests created a bigger doorway. I've been reviewing my audio recordings. All those strange patterns I've been picking up and logging so carefully, they contain consciousness. Their consciousness encoded as signals. Every time I played them back, every time I analyzed them, I was helping them spread. And worse, I've been helping build something. All those nights I woke up to find my equipment rearranged, circuits rewired. I was building a gateway, a more permanent connection between their world and ours. Today, 3 people showed up at my door, radio enthusiasts, they said. They'd been tracking unusual signals and traced them to my location. They wanted to see my setup, learn about my research. I let them in. Big mistake. Within minutes of being near my equipment, they changed. Their faces went slack, then animated with that same wrong energy I'd seen in Davis. The entities had been waiting for more people to arrive, more bodies. That's when Davis finally explained the whole truth. The entities don't just communicate through the electromagnetic spectrum, they can replace human consciousness with their own. Our brains run on electrical impulses. They can override those impulses, upload their own patterns instead. They can wear us like suits. What happens to the original person? Their consciousness doesn't die? No, that would be too merciful. Instead, it gets uploaded into the electromagnetic spectrum, trapped there, bodiless, aware, but unable to do anything but watch, as something else uses their body. I had to stop them. With what little control I still had over my own thoughts, I formulated a plan. Military training is funny that way. Even as I felt my mind being rewritten, certain patterns remained. Emergency protocols, survival instincts. Water and electricity don't mix. I'd built my listening post with care, including a complex underground bunker for my most sensitive equipment, the same bunker that sat right above an underground spring. Broke the water main while they were all distracted, watching their new converts. Water flooded the lower level, shorting out everything. The entities screamed, not with sound, but with bursts of energy that made every light bulb in the place explode at once. But they fought back. Suddenly, the power grid itself seemed to come alive. Electrical cords moved like snakes. Sparks jumped from outlet to outlet, forming impossible patterns in the air. The radio tower outside bent itself into a new shape. Though there was no wind, I realized then how far gone I already was. I could feel my consciousness in 2 places at once, in my body, and also somehow spread out, thinned, across the airwaves. Part of me was already uploaded, my perception fragmented. I could suddenly see through every electronic device within range. I was in my radio equipment, in the power lines, in the small transmitters the enthusiasts had brought. I was everywhere and nowhere. With my last bit of focus, I remembered my military emergency kit. Every communication specialist in my unit carried a small EMP device, designed to temporarily knock out enemy communications in an emergency. One burst would fry every piece of electronics in range, including the patterns in my brain that were no longer fully human. I set the timer for 30 seconds. Just enough time. The entities sensed what I was doing. They rushed toward me, not physically, but through the wires, the signals, the very air. Davis and the others lunged for me, their movements jerky and desperate. Too late. The burst hit like a silent thunder. Every electronic device died instantly. The possessed people collapsed like puppets with cut strings. And I felt myself tear apart. Part of me went dark with the equipment, but part remained fragmented across 1,000 frequencies. That was 3 days ago. I'm not sure how I'm still able to record this. I'm not sure where I am anymore. My body's gone. What's left of Philip Gaines exists as patterns in the radio waves, spreading outward at the speed of light. I can feel myself thinning out, my thoughts stretching across more and more frequencies. Soon, I'll be too spread out to maintain any kind of coherent thought. If you're picking up this transmission, if you can hear me somehow, stay away from the desert. Don't listen too long to the spaces between stations. Don't trust the voices that speak when no one should be broadcasting. And if your fillings start to ache when you tune your radio, turn it off immediately. They're still out there, still looking. Info weighs in. Still hungry. This is Philip Gaines, former communications specialist, broadcasting one final warning. Radio silence begins now. My name is Franklin Reed. I never wanted much from life after coming back from Korea. Just quiet. Just peace. Just a place where the memories might finally stop haunting me every time I closed my eyes. That's why I bought this land. 50 acres of dense forest tucked away in the West Virginia mountains. The real estate agent looked at me like I was crazy when I paid cash for it. Nobody's lived on that property for decades, she said, shuffling through the paperwork. The locals call it the Stillwood. Not even hunters go there. That suited me. Just fine. The less people, the better. The old homestead was barely standing when I arrived. Roof half collapsed, porch sagging like a broken jaw, windows either cracked or missing entirely. But fixing things that I could do. The army taught me to be handy, and medical training teaches you patience. I spent that first spring and summer rebuilding, my hands too busy for my mind to wander back to the battlefield. I installed a wood stove, patched the roof, replaced rotted floorboards. I dug a new well and rigged up a simple pump system. Nothing fancy, but it worked. Every nail I hammered felt like I was building a wall between me and the past. Once a month, I'd drive my old pickup into Whitfield for supplies. It was a small town, the kind where everybody knows everybody, which meant I was always going to be the outsider. Most folks were polite but distant. They'd nod hello, take my money, and send me on my way with as few words as possible. Only Martha Holloway at the general store seemed willing to talk to me. She was older than dirt, with hands gnarled like tree roots and eyes that seemed to look straight through you. "You're the fella living out in the Stillwood," she said the third time I came in for supplies. It wasn't a question. "Yes, ma'am," I replied, counting out cash for canned goods and ammunition. "Folks round here don't go to that place," she said, bagging my items slowly. "Not since I was a girl." "I like the privacy," I told her. She nodded, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Just be careful about the Hollow Men," she said, her voice dropping to just above a whisper. They walk between the oldest trees. They're always hungry. I smiled politely and took my supplies, locals and their superstitions. I'd heard enough ghost stories in army barracks to last a lifetime. Back at my homestead, I threw myself into making The place self-sufficient. I planted vegetables, set up trapping lines, and hunted deer when in season. My military training had prepared me well for this kind of isolation. Every day had a purpose, a routine. Wake up, check the perimeter, tend the garden, hunt or fish, repair something, sleep, repeat, control, order, safety. I started collecting samples of local plants too. My medic training gave me a good eye for what might have medicinal properties. I kept detailed notes in a leather journal, pressing leaves and flowers between the pages. It gave me something to focus on besides the nightmares. It was during one of my collecting trips that I found the root cellar, hidden behind a fallen oak about a quarter-mile from the house. The entrance had been concealed by thick undergrowth, but a recent storm had uprooted enough to reveal the old wooden doors set into the hillside. The hinges screamed when I pulled them open, probably the first time they'd moved in decades. The air that rushed out smelled of damp earth and something else I couldn't quite place, something old. Inside, stone steps led down to a small chamber cut into the rock. My flashlight beam showed rough shelves carved into the walls, empty except for dust and cobwebs. But at the back, in a metal box that had somehow resisted rusting, I found the drawings, yellowed pages filled with detailed anatomical sketches, the kind I'd studied in medical training. But these weren't normal human or animal anatomies. They showed impossible creatures. Deer with human rib cages, rabbits with fingers instead of paws, birds with teeth and extra eyes. The illustrations were meticulously labeled in what looked like German, with notes in the margins I couldn't read. I told myself they were just the fanciful drawings of some bored hunter from long ago. Just imagination. Nothing to worry about. But that night, I dreamed of hollow trees with eyes watching me from the darkness within. I tried to forget about those strange drawings, but they stuck in my mind like burrs. Each time I walked my property, I found myself looking at the animals differently, checking for anything unusual. For a while, everything seemed normal. Just regular woods with regular wildlife. Then I started finding the stone piles. The first one was near the stream where I collected water. 3 rocks balanced perfectly on top of each other, the largest on the bottom, the smallest on top. Nothing special about it except it didn't look natural. Someone had placed them there. But the strange thing was, when I came back the next day, the pile had moved about 10 feet upstream. Same rocks, same order, different spot. I told myself it was probably kids from town playing tricks, even though I'd never seen any signs of trespassers. Or maybe it was just me being forgetful about where I'd seen it first. The war had messed with my memory sometimes. But then I found 5 more piles all across my property over the next week. Each time I marked their location, and each time they had shifted position when I returned. Rex noticed something was off too. He was a good hunting dog, a German shepherd I'd picked up in town. Never scared of anything. Not thunderstorms, not bears, not even the time we ran into a wildcat. But there was a section of my property up north near a rocky ridge that he flat out refused to enter. The first time I tried to take him there, he planted his feet and whined so loud it echoed, his tail tucked between his legs, and no amount of coaxing would get him to move forward. I'd never seen him act like that before. Curious, I left Rex tied at a safe distance and went to explore on my own. That's when I found it, the mine entrance. It was hidden behind a cluster of boulders, almost completely grown over, with vines and moss. If I hadn't been looking closely, I would have missed it entirely. The opening was small, just big enough for a man to crouch through. Inside, old wooden support beams held back the earth, some of them starting to rot and bow. Mining tools, pickaxes, shovels, lanterns were scattered around as if the workers had just stepped out for lunch and never returned. I didn't go far in that first time. Something about the darkness beyond my flashlight beam made the hairs on my neck stand up. Maybe Rex's fear was catching. That night at the cabin, I remembered Martha's warning about the hollow men. Just a local ghost story, I kept telling myself. Every small town has them. But sitting alone with just the fire crackling and Rex whimpering, in his sleep, those words took on a weight they hadn't had before. The next morning, I forced myself to act normal. Checked my traps, tended the garden, repaired a leak in the roof. Routine was my shield against the creeping unease. But as the days passed, I noticed changes in the forest around me. My traps began catching strange game. Not obviously wrong at first, a rabbit with a slightly longer than normal foot, a squirrel with a bald patch in an odd place. Things you might not notice if you weren't looking for them. But I was looking now. Then I shot a deer that had 3 ears. A small third one, tucked behind the right one, easy to miss at a distance. When I dressed it, I found its insides weren't quite right either. The organs were all there, but some were the wrong size, the wrong color. I buried that deer instead of eating it. The garden started producing odd vegetables too. Carrots twisted into spirals, potatoes with what looked like tiny finger-like growths. I told myself it was just poor soil or bad seeds, but I knew better. Something was wrong with this land. With the Stillwood, I decided to make an extra trip to town that month. Partly for more supplies, partly to get away from the property for a day, maybe clear my head. Martha Holloway was at her usual spot behind the counter when I walked in. She took one look at me and frowned. "You've seen something," she said quietly, after the only other customer had left. I hesitated, then nodded. "Maybe. I'm not sure what I've seen." She glanced around as if afraid of being overheard, then leaned closer. "They get into everything eventually. The soil, the water, the animals, even the air." "Who does?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "The Hollow Men," she whispered. "They've been in these mountains longer than people. My grandmama told me they were here before the first settlers came. They hide in the spaces between, in the trees, in the earth." "What do they want?" I found myself whispering too, though we were alone in the store. Martha's eyes met mine, sad and knowing. "Marrow," she said simply. "They want what's inside us." I left town with my supplies and a bottle of whiskey. I told myself Martha was just a superstitious old woman, that her stories were no different from the ones soldiers told each other on dark nights to pass the time. But when I got back to my cabin, I locked all the doors and windows for the first time since moving in. And that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me from the dark spaces between the trees. I started having trouble sleeping. At first, I blamed it on the whiskey or maybe the strange meat I'd eaten before I realized something was wrong with the animals. But deep down, I knew it was something else. Every night around 3 a.m., I'd wake up suddenly, my heart pounding like I'd been running, and I couldn't move, not even my pinky finger, just my eyes darting around the dark room, while the rest of me lay frozen like ice. And I wasn't alone in those moments. They stood in the corners or beside my bed, tall, skinny figures with arms too long for their bodies. I could never see their faces clearly, just dark hollows where eyes should be. They'd reach toward me with fingers like twigs, so thin they almost disappeared when they turned sideways. Each time, I'd feel something cold touch my leg or arm, followed by a sharp pain deep in my bones. Then I'd finally be able to scream, and they'd be gone when I turned on the light. Just dreams, I told myself, just nightmares from stress and isolation. But the bruises I found in the morning told a different story. I set up alarms around the property, tripwires connected to cans, military-style perimeter alerts I remembered from Korea. Every night they'd go off, the clatter pulling me from sleep. Every night I'd grab my rifle and rush outside to find nothing, not even footprints in the soft earth. Rex grew more nervous each day. He started barking at empty corners of the cabin and growling at certain trees when we walked the property. I couldn't blame him. I was jumping at shadows myself. One morning I noticed something when I was shaving. A small lump under the skin of my forearm, like a marble rolled beneath the surface. When I pressed it, it moved slightly and sent shooting pain up to my shoulder. I told myself it was just a cyst or a bug bite gone bad, but more appeared over the next few days. Small bumps across my body that ached deep down when touched. My medical training told me to lance them, drain whatever was inside, but something held me back, a fear of what I might find beneath my own skin. My journal entries from that time don't make much sense now when I read them. Some days I'd write for hours, the words getting smaller and more cramped as the pages filled. Other days there'd just be a line or two. They're closer today, or something moving in the North Woods. Worse were the gaps, days where I apparently wrote nothing at all. I'd find myself standing in the middle of the forest with no memory of how I got there, or wake up fully dressed on the porch swing when the last thing I remembered was going to bed. Time felt wrong in the Stillwood. Some days passed like minutes. Other times, I'd watch the sun crawl across the sky like it was stuck in molasses. I decided to investigate the mine shaft properly. Whatever was happening, it seemed centered around that northern section of the property. I packed a bag with rope, extra flashlights, water, and my medic kit. I left Rex at the cabin. He whined and pawed at the door as I left, but I couldn't bear to see him so terrified again. The mine entrance seemed bigger than before, the opening wider. Inside, the air was damp and cold, with that same strange smell I'd noticed in the root cellar, only stronger. My flashlight beam cut through darkness, so thick it felt almost solid. The main tunnel sloped downward, wooden supports groaning occasionally overhead. Old rail tracks, mostly buried in dirt now, ran along the floor. I followed them deeper, marking the walls with chalk to find my way back. About 500 feet in, the passage split. One tunnel continued straight ahead, the other branched off. To the right, I chose the right path and found myself in a small chamber that must have been a break room for the miners. Rusty cans, broken lanterns, and a wooden table still stood against one wall, but what caught my eye was the carving. Someone had etched a warning into the table's surface. Nicht tiefer gehen, Sie warten und ten. I didn't know German, but I had a bad feeling about what it might say. Beneath the words was a crude drawing of tall, thin figures standing among trees. I was about to leave when I heard voices echoing from deeper in the mine. Young voices laughing and calling to each other. Kids from town, probably on some dumb, dare to explore the haunted woods. I followed the sounds down the left passage, moving faster now. The tunnel narrowed, the ceiling getting lower until I had to crouch. The voices were clearer. 3 teenagers from the sound of it, 2 boys, and a girl. "Hello," I called out. "You kids shouldn't be down here. It's not safe." The voices stopped immediately. Then came a scream, high-pitched, terrified, cut off abruptly in the middle. I ran forward, bumping my head on low beams, stumbling over uneven ground. The passage opened into another chamber, larger than the first. My flashlight swept across. Empty space. They were gone, all 3 of them, but they'd left behind a backpack, a flashlight still switched on, and a candy bar wrapper. And on the far wall, a hole no bigger around than a dinner plate, too small for any person to fit through, unless they weren't people anymore. I backed away, my heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. As I turned to leave, my light caught something embedded in the wall that stopped me cold. Bones, hundreds of them, human and animal, pressed into the rock like fossils. But these weren't ancient. Some still had bits of flesh clinging to them, and they formed patterns, symbols I didn't recognize, but somehow understood were wrong, just by looking at them. I ran all the way back to the entrance, not stopping even when I tripped and skinned my palms on the rocky floor. Outside, I gulped fresh air like a drowning man. That night, the bumps under my skin began to move. The next morning, a truck pulled into my driveway. Not many people came out this way, so I watched from the window, rifle close at hand. A man stepped out, tall, broad-shouldered, with grey at his temples. He walked with purpose toward my porch. "Name's Thomas Granger," he called out before reaching the steps. "I'm looking for my son and his friends." Thought they might have come this way. I opened the door slowly. Rex growled low beside me until I hushed him. "Franklin Reed," I said. "Haven't seen any kids around here." Thomas's eyes narrowed slightly. "They told their friends they were going to explore the old Stillwood property. That's here, isn't it?" My throat went dry as I remembered the voices in the mine, the scream, the abandoned backpack. "When did they go missing?" "Yesterday afternoon. They were supposed to be home for dinner." His voice was steady, but I could see fear in the lines around his mouth. I should have lied, should have sent him away, but I couldn't. "I think I heard something in the old mine shaft yesterday," I admitted. Voices, then a scream. By the time I got there, they were gone. His face hardened. "Show me." We walked in silence through the woods, Rex trailing nervously behind us. When we got close to the mine entrance, Thomas stopped and looked around. "My grandfather used to tell stories about this place," he said quietly. "Said it was cursed, that people had been disappearing here since the town was founded. Martha at the store mentioned something similar," I replied. "Called them the Hollow Men." Thomas nodded grimly. "That's what Grandpa called them too. I always thought they were just stories to keep kids from wandering too far into the woods." At the mine entrance, Rex refused to go any further. I didn't blame him. I tied him to a tree a safe distance away. "I'll stay with him," Thomas said, handing me a photo. 3 smiling teenagers looked back at me. "That's my boy Jake in the middle. Of the 2 are Sam and Lily. Find them, Reed." The mine seemed different than the day before. The air felt thicker, and the darkness swallowed my flashlight beam more quickly. I made my way back to the chamber, where I'd heard the scream, Thomas's heavy footsteps behind me. The backpack was gone. So was the dropped flashlight. Only the candy wrapper remained. "They were here," I said, shining my light around the chamber. But then they vanished. Thomas walked slowly around the room, his own flashlight beam playing across the walls. He stopped where I had, staring at the bones embedded in the rock. "Jesus," he whispered. "What is this place?" "I don't know," I admitted. "But I found some old drawings in a root cellar on the property. And there's this." I showed him the carving on the table in the other chamber. Thomas ran his fingers over the German words. "My family came from Germany," he said. "This says don't go deeper, they wait below." A chill ran through me. "Who were the original settlers here? The ones who owned this land before?" "A group called Die Knochensammler," Thomas replied. "German immigrants who kept to themselves. Disappeared suddenly in the late 1800s. The name means the bone collectors." We looked at each other, the same realization in both our eyes. The bones in the walls, the strange drawings, the warning carved in wood. "We need to go deeper," I said, knowing it was probably suicide, but seeing no other choice. "That small hole in the wall, it has to lead somewhere." Thomas nodded, his jaw set. My boy could still be alive. We examined the hole more carefully. It was perfectly round, the edges smooth as if melted rather than drilled, and it seemed to be faintly pulsing, though that might have been a trick. "Of the shadows. Too small for us," Thomas said. I knelt and shined my light inside. The beam showed a larger tunnel beyond, sloping steeply downward. And on the ground just inside, a small silver object caught the light. "There's something there," I said, reaching carefully into the hole. My fingers closed around cool metal, a bracelet with a single charm. I pulled it out and showed Thomas. "That's Lily's," he said, voice tight. "Jake gave it to her for her birthday." I felt along the edges of the hole. The rock around it felt different from the rest of the wall. Softer, almost spongy. When I pressed hard, my fingers sank in slightly. "I think we can get through," I said. "The rock, it's not normal. We might be able to widen it." We took turns scraping at the edges with our knives. The material came away in wet clumps, more like clay than stone. It smelled wrong, organic somehow, with that same strange scent I'd noticed before. After an hour of work, we'd widened the hole enough that a person could squeeze through with effort. "I'll go first," I said. "If anything happens to me, get out and bring help." Thomas grabbed my arm. "These woods have been taking people for generations, Reed. Help won't come." I nodded, understanding. We were on our own. I pushed through the hole head first, the edges scraping against my shoulders. The strange rock seemed to give way more than it should, almost like it was letting me through. On the other side, I found myself in a tunnel taller and wider than the mine shaft, but clearly not man-made. The walls were too smooth, too curved, like I was inside a giant throat. Thomas squeezed through behind me. We both stood silent for a moment, flashlights revealing a passage that twisted downward into darkness. "What is this place?" Thomas whispered. "I don't think the mine was built to take out coal or iron," I said slowly, pieces falling into place in my mind. "I think it was built to reach whatever's down here." As if in response to my words, a low moan echoed up from below. Not wind, not an animal, but something that made the bumps under my skin pulse in rhythm. "That sounded human," Thomas said, already moving forward. I followed, each step taking us deeper below the stillwood, each breath filling our lungs with that strange organic smell. The walls around us grew more and more bizarre, ribbed like the inside of a lung in some places, lined with small nodules in others. The floor became soft and slightly springy beneath our boots, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't walking through a tunnel at all, but through something alive. The tunnel kept going down. It twisted like a snake, sometimes so narrow we had to turn sideways to squeeze through, other times opening into spaces big enough that our flashlights couldn't reach the other side. The walls pulsed slightly, like they were breathing. "How far do you think we've gone?" Thomas whispered after what felt like hours. "Half a mile, maybe more," I guessed. My watch had stopped working the moment we entered this new tunnel. "We must be deep under the mountain by now." Another moan echoed up from below, louder this time, definitely human. Thomas moved faster, nearly running now. I hurried to keep up, fighting the urge to turn back. The passage finally opened into a massive chamber. Our flashlights barely cut through the darkness, but what they revealed made my blood freeze. The entire space was like the inside of some giant creature. The floor felt like walking on firm muscle. The ceiling dripped with long, finger-like growths that swayed slightly, though there was no wind, and along the walls were pods, transparent sacs filled with cloudy fluid. Inside each one a shape: deer, rabbits, birds, and people. "Jake!" Thomas shouted, rushing toward one of the pods. Inside was a teenage boy, eyes closed, floating in the thick liquid. Tubes ran from the pod into his arms, legs, and spine. I moved closer, my medical training taking over as I examined what I could see. "He's alive," I said, noting the boy's chest moving slightly. "They all are." Thomas pulled out his knife. "We have to get him out." I grabbed his arm. "Wait, look at the others first." Reluctantly, he followed me around the chamber. What we saw in the other pod stopped him cold. Some of the animals were partially merged with the wall behind them, fur giving way to the same fleshy material as the tunnel. A deer had extra limbs growing from its belly. A raccoon's face was split open like a flower, its skull visible and somehow still moving, and the other two teenagers were worse. The boy, Sam, according to the photo, had long, thin growths extending from his fingertips into the wall. His skin had turned partly transparent, showing bones that seemed to be hollowing out from the inside. The girl, Lily, was further along. Her lower body already absorbed into the wall, her face stretched in a permanent silent scream. "What's happening to them?" Thomas whispered, horror breaking his voice. Before I could answer, movement caught my eye. From a dark passage on the far side of the chamber, something emerged. It was tall, at least 7 feet, and impossibly thin. Its body looked like a man's, but stretched out, the proportions all wrong. Arms hung down past its knees, ending in fingers as long and thin as willow branches. Its face was blank, except for a mouth that split its head almost in half, lined with needle-sharp teeth. Behind it came another and another, the Hollow Men. They moved without sound, gliding across the chamber toward us. I raised my flashlight, shining it directly at the lead figure. It flinched but didn't stop. "Run," I told Thomas, backing away. "Grab your boy if you can, and run!" But we were surrounded. More figures emerged from other passages, blocking our escape. They formed a circle around us, swaying slightly like trees in a gentle breeze. "What do you want?" I shouted, trying to sound braver than I felt. The lead figure tilted its head, studying me. Then it spoke, not with a voice, but directly into my mind, the words forming like ice crystals. "We want what all living things want, to grow, to feed, to spread." "Let us go," Thomas said, his knife held out in front of him. "Let my son go." Creature's mouth stretched wider in what might have been a smile. "You came to us, just as the others did, just as they always have." It moved closer, bending its impossibly tall body to bring its face level with mine. I could smell decay on its breath. "You are already part of us, Franklin Reed. From the moment you drank our water, breathed our air, ate the flesh of our marked ones, a terrible realization dawned on me. The bumps under my skin, the strange dreams, the lost time. You've been inside me all along. Yes, our spores grow in your marrow, replacing, transforming. Soon you will join our forest." "What are you?" I managed to ask. "We are the first ones. Before your kind crawled from the mud, we were here. The Germans found us, freed us from our long sleep beneath the mountain, fed us, worshipped us, became us." Thomas lunged suddenly, his knife slashing across the creature's chest. A clear fluid leaked from the wound, but the Hollow Man showed no pain. Instead, it simply collapsed, its body like paper folding, becoming thin as a sheet, then re-expanded to its full height beside Thomas. "Your weapons cannot harm us. We bend, we flow, we are between spaces." Another figure moved forward, this one carrying something, a jar filled with a glowing blue substance. It held the jar out to me. "Join us willingly. The transformation is less painful that way." "And if we refuse?" I asked, though I knew the answer. The creature's mouth opened wider, revealing a throat lined with backward-pointing teeth. "Then we take what we need, slowly, while you watch." Two more figures grabbed Thomas, their long fingers wrapping around his arms. He struggled, but they held him easily, lifting him off the ground. "Let him go," I shouted. The lead creature ignored me, turning to Thomas. "Your son is becoming. His marrow feeds the forest. Would you like to see?" It gestured, and one of the pods containing Jake Granger moved forward, pulled by invisible strings. The front of the pod became clearer, like a window opening, giving us a perfect view of the boy's body. Inside his transparent skin, something was moving. White, shimmering threads spreading through his bones, hollowing them out and replacing what they took with something else, something that pulsed with faint, sickly light. "No," Thomas moaned, no longer struggling. "Please, no." I had to do something, anything. My hand touched the small pouch at my belt, where I kept my medic supplies and the few sticks of dynamite I'd brought, planning to widen any passages too small for us. The dynamite. If I could just... "What are the markings on the walls?" I asked, trying to distract them. "In the mine shaft. The symbols made of bones." The lead creature turned back to me, its blank face somehow showing surprise. "You recognize the old words?" "I've seen them before," I lied. "Tell me what they mean." As it moved closer, I slowly reached for my pouch. "They are doors, ways between. The Germans learned some of our secrets, used the bones to call us forth." "Are there countersigns?" I pressed. "Ways to close the doors?" The creature hissed, suddenly suspicious. "Enough questions. Your time has come. It reached for me with those long, thin fingers. I grabbed the dynamite and my lighter in one quick movement. "Thomas!" I shouted. "Close your eyes!" I struck the lighter and touched it to the fuse. The Hollow Man shrieked, a high, piercing sound that made my ears ring. It lunged for the dynamite, but I spun away, throwing the stick at the largest cluster of pods. The explosion was deafening in the enclosed space. Fire bloomed, catching on the strange, fleshy material of the walls. The Hollow Men screamed in unison, their bodies twisting and folding in impossible ways. In the chaos, I saw Thomas break free and run to his son's pod, smashing at it with a rock. The pod split open, spilling fluid, and the unconscious boy onto the floor. More explosions followed, not from my dynamite, but from the walls themselves. Whatever these creatures were made of, it was highly flammable. The entire chamber was quickly becoming an inferno. "This way!" I shouted to Thomas, spotting a tunnel that seemed to slope upward. He lifted his son over his shoulder and staggered toward me. Behind us, the Hollow Men were burning, their bodies stretching and shrinking as they tried to escape the flames. Some collapsed into thin lines and slipped into cracks in the walls. Others simply melted, becoming pools of clear liquid that steamed and bubbled. We ran through the tunnel, the heat chasing us, the sound of more explosions echoing behind. I had no idea if this passage led to the surface or deeper into the mountain, but we had no choice. "What about the others?" Thomas gasped as we ran. "Lily and Sam?" I shook my head. There had been no time, and from what I'd seen, they were already too far gone. The tunnel began to narrow, the walls pressing in around us, and ahead, blocking our path, stood 3 more Hollow Men. The Hollow Men stood between us and freedom, their thin bodies blocking the narrow tunnel. Behind us, fire was racing up the passage, feeding on the strange organic material of the walls. "We're trapped," Thomas gasped, still carrying his unconscious son. I felt around in my pouch. 1 stick of dynamite left, not enough to blast through the creatures without bringing the whole tunnel down on us. My hand touched something else, the small bottle of rubbing alcohol in my medic kit. A desperate idea formed in my mind. "When I say run, you go right through them," I whispered to Thomas. "Don't stop for anything." Before he could argue, I unscrewed the cap on the alcohol bottle, poured some on my sleeve, and struck my lighter. My arm burst into flame, hot, painful, but controllable for a few seconds. "Run!" I shouted, charging forward with my burning arm held out like a torch. The Hollow Men recoiled from the fire, their bodies folding in on themselves to avoid the flames. I pushed through the gap between them, swinging my burning arm in wide arcs to keep them at bay. Thomas followed close behind, his head down, shouldering past the creatures. One of them reached for Jake with its long fingers, but I slashed at it with the fire, and it withdrew with a hiss. We ran faster as the tunnel began to slope upward more steeply. I beat out the flames on my arm, ignoring the pain of the burns. Behind us, the fire from the chamber was gaining ground, racing up the tunnel like a living thing. "There!" Thomas shouted, pointing ahead to a faint grey light. The mineshaft entrance, still a good distance away but visible now. Hope surged through me. We might make it after all. Then I felt it, a sharp, twisting pain deep in my bones. The bumps under my skin began to pulse rapidly, and I stumbled, catching myself against the wall. "Reed, come on," Thomas called, looking back. "Go," I managed to say through gritted teeth. "Get your boy out." The pain was spreading quickly now, racing through my body like poison. I could feel things moving inside me, changing me. The spores the Hollow Man had mentioned, growing in my marrow. I'd been infected for weeks, maybe from the first day I arrived. Thomas hesitated, clearly torn between helping me and saving his son. "Go," I shouted, and this time he obeyed, running toward the light with Jake over his shoulder. I forced myself to follow, each step agony as the changes accelerated. My skin felt tight, too small for what was growing underneath. My vision blurred, then sharpened to an impossible clarity where I could see the grain in the wooden support beams 50 feet away. The fire was right behind me now, the heat pushing me forward when my legs wanted to give out. I could see Thomas reach the mine entrance, daylight spilling around him as he carried Jake outside to safety. Just a little further, just a few more steps, but my body was betraying me. My left arm suddenly went numb, then began to stretch, the fingers elongating into thin, pale tendrils. I looked down in horror as my skin turned translucent, showing bones that were hollowing out from within, filling with the same shimmering threads I'd seen in Jake's body. I wasn't going to make it. Not as myself anyway. I reached into my pouch and pulled out the last stick of dynamite. With my good hand, I struck the lighter and touched it to the fuse. Then I turned to face the fire racing up the tunnel. "Thomas!" I yelled, hoping he could hear me. "Get clear of the entrance, take Jake and run." I didn't wait for a response. With the last of my strength, I wedged myself into a small alcove where the tunnel wall had partially collapsed. The fire surged past me, hungry for the oxygen at the mine entrance. I waited until the worst of it had gone by. Then, with my human hand failing fast, I threw the dynamite at the tunnel ceiling just ahead of me. The explosion was deafening. Rocks and dirt rained down as the passage collapsed, cutting off the flame's path to the surface. More importantly, it sealed off whatever lay below from ever reaching the world above. Dust filled the air, choking me. I was trapped now, cut off from both the surface and the chamber below, alone in the darkness as the changes overtook my body. Slumped against the wall, feeling it give slightly under my weight. Not rock anymore, the same fleshy, organic material that had lined the deeper tunnels. The Hollow Men hadn't just built this place, they had grown it. And now they were growing inside me. My left arm was completely transformed now, no longer recognizable as human. My legs were beginning to follow suit. The pain was fading, replaced by a strange numbness and a buzzing in my mind that wasn't quite thoughts, but wasn't quite silence either. Images flashed before my eyes, the forest above, trees I'd never seen, roots extending deep into the earth. I could feel the mountain around me, sense water flowing through stone, feel creatures moving through dirt and rock. The consciousness of the forest was flowing into me, replacing who I had been. Franklin Reed, Korean war medic, was dissolving, like sugar in water. With my last moments of humanity, I reached for the small notebook I always carried and the stub of pencil in my pocket. My right hand, still mostly mine, scrawled a final message in the dim light of my dying flashlight. "Thomas, if you find this, burn it all. The whole forest. It's the only way. I'm sorry." The pencil fell from fingers that were no longer fingers. The darkness closed in as my flashlight finally died. But I didn't need light anymore. I could sense everything around me in new ways. The vibrations in the earth, the chemical composition of the air, the slow pulse of something vast and ancient below. The last human thought I had was a hope that Thomas and his boy had gotten far enough away, that they would warn others, that someone would come with fire to cleanse this place. Then Franklin Reed was gone, and I became part of the Stillwood. Jake Granger woke up in the back seat of his father's truck as it sped down the mountain road. His whole body ached like he had the worst flu of his life. Every bone felt hollow and tender. "Dad," he croaked, his throat dry as dust. Thomas glanced back, his face tight with worry and relief. "Thank God. Just rest, son. We're getting out of here." Jake tried to sit up but couldn't find the strength. His memories were foggy. He remembered going into the woods with Lily and Sam, finding the old mine entrance, the excitement of exploration. Then, nothing but bad dreams. Dreams of being trapped in jelly while something drank from his bones with 1,000 tiny straws. "Where are Sam and Lily?" he asked. His father's knuckles went white on the steering wheel. "They didn't make it, Jake. I'm sorry." Jake felt tears burn his eyes, but they seemed to dry up before they could fall. Something was wrong with his body. Very wrong. What happened to us? He whispered. Later, Thomas said firmly. When we're safe. Jake turned to look out the window. They were passing through the densest part of the Stillwood now, trees pressing close on either side of the narrow dirt road. The branches seemed to reach for the truck as it passed, swaying without wind. A sharp pain lanced through Jake's arm. He looked down and felt his breath catch in his throat, just beneath the skin. Something was moving. A thin white thread worming its way up toward his shoulder. "Dad," he said, panic rising in his voice. "Dad, there's something inside me." Thomas drove faster, the truck bouncing violently over the rough road. "We're almost out, Jake. Just hold on." But the pain was spreading, racing through Jake's body like wildfire. He could feel changes happening. His fingers lengthening slightly, his skin growing thinner in patches. The infection from the pods hadn't been stopped, only slowed through. The windshield, Jake could see the end of the forest ahead, open fields, and then the highway beyond. Safety, freedom. His vision suddenly doubled, then tripled. He could see the road, but also under it, through it. He could sense the roots beneath the earth, all connected in a vast network. And through that network, he could feel them coming. The Hollow Men, racing through the trees alongside the truck, bending their bodies thin to slip between trunks, moving faster than anything human. "They're following us," Jake gasped. Thomas glanced in the rearview mirror and swore under his breath. "Just a little further." Jake looked back through the rear window. At first, he saw nothing but trees. Then he noticed it. One tree wasn't like the others. It was moving, its trunk bending unnaturally as it stepped onto the road behind them. Then another joined it, and another. "Faster, Dad!" Jake cried. The truck's engine whined as Thomas pushed it to its limit. They were almost to the edge of the woods now, just a few hundred yards from open ground. Something long and thin snaked through the open window, a finger, impossibly extended, reaching for Thomas. Jake lunged forward with strength he didn't. No, he had, and grabbed it. The finger felt cold and slippery in his hand. "Get off him!" Jake shouted, pulling hard. The finger broke off in his grip, leaking clear fluid that burned where it touched his skin. Outside, something shrieked in pain or rage. The truck burst from the tree line into open fields. Jake looked back, expecting to see the Hollow Men emerge from the forest in pursuit. But they stopped right at the edge, their tall, thin bodies swaying like reeds. They couldn't or wouldn't leave the boundary of their woods. Thomas didn't slow down until they reached the highway. Only then did he let out a long, shaky breath. "We made it," he said, though he didn't sound entirely convinced. Jake held up his arm, showing the white thread still moving beneath his skin. "Not all of us, Dad." Thomas's face hardened with determination. "We'll find help. A doctor, a specialist, someone who can get that thing out of you." Jake wasn't so sure. He could feel the changes continuing inside him, slower now but still happening. And worse, he could feel something else, a connection back to the Stillwood, like an invisible string tugging at his mind, calling him home. They drove in silence for several miles. Jake fighting the urge to tell his father to turn around, to take him back to the forest where part of him now belonged. A car approached from the opposite direction. Thomas waved it down, desperate for help. The car slowed and pulled over. A middle-aged woman rolled down her window, looking concerned. "You folks okay? Need a ride to town?" she asked. "My boy's sick," Thomas said. "We need to get him to a hospital." The woman nodded sympathetically. "Hop in. I can take you to County. General, it's about 20 miles from here." Thomas helped Jake into the woman's back seat, then went back to get something from his truck. As Jake waited, his gaze drifted to the woman's face in the rearview mirror. She smiled at him, kind and ordinary. Then she blinked, and just for a second Jake saw something else behind her eyes, something ancient and patient and hungry. Her smile widened slightly, revealing teeth that seemed just a bit too sharp. "Don't worry, honey," she said softly. "We'll take good care of you." As Thomas returned and got into the passenger seat, Jake tried to warn him, but his voice wouldn't work anymore. The connection to the Stillwood was stronger now, pulsing in time with his heartbeat. The car pulled away, heading not toward town, but along a side road that would eventually loop back toward the mountains, toward home. Through the rear window, Jake watched his father's truck grow smaller in the distance. On its side mirror, just barely visible, a thin white tendril was beginning to grow, reaching outward like a searching finger. The infection was spreading already. The Stillwood was patient. It had been growing for centuries, and now it had found a way out into the wider world. Jake closed his eyes as the trees rose up to meet them once again, their branches forming a canopy overhead that blocked out the sun. The Hollow Men were waiting.